Welcome to the series Speaking Up for Point Molate, in which invited speakers will address key questions about Point Molate and the public can ask questions. We'd like to begin the program by recognizing that we're gathered on Ohlone, unceded Ohlone land. For thousands of years, the Lijan Ohlone people have lived on the land that's now known as the East Bay, including Point Molate. In their own words, they did not own the land, they belonged to it. We recognize the importance of this land to the Ohlone people, past, present, and future, and invite you to join us in learning about and honoring the Lijan Ohlone history and work today. Our speakers present for about 40 minutes, then we'll answer questions. Please limit questions to 1 minute. We invite sincere questions asked with courtesy and respect. And please use the chat to let us know how we can improve, or to leave your email if you'd like us to send you announcements directly. Also, if you would prefer to leave a question in the chat, that would be fine. We'll post our YouTube channel where we post recordings of all the speakers. I'm Pam Stello. I am co-chair of the Point Molate and Richmond Shoreline Alliances. I serve on the board of Citizens for East Shore Parks. I live in Richmond and I'm co-founder of this series with Sally Tobin. Sally, can you wave? Sally's a biologist and retiree of the Stanford Center for Biomedical Ethics. She works with the Point Molate and Richmond Shoreline Alliances and is a member of the Bay Area Sea Kayakers. She serves on the board of Citizens for East Shore Parks and lives in Richmond. Our Zoom administrator is Danny Zaki. Danny's an organizer with the San Francisco Bay chapter of the Sierra Club, focusing on bay and shoreline issues, most frequently pertaining to sea level rise, and is an organizer for the King Tides Project. Danny's also working towards a master's degree at UC Davis studying geography. Please wave, Danny. I'm now going to turn it over to David Helvard to introduce our speaker today.
Okay, and I'm happy to introduce my friend Liz Taylor, who's president of DOER Marine Operations, one of the few marine technology companies producing robotic and human operated submersibles. I won't say manned submersibles because it's a woman-owned company. A lot of their field work has taken place in national marine sanctuaries, monuments, and marine protected areas that are also known as MPAs. Along with being a fellow of the Explorers Club and other honors, Liz was just inducted into the Women Divers Hall of Fame. So congrats. She also works with her business founder and mom, Dr. Sylvia Earle, founder of Mission Blue. And if you want to hear more about Liz's upbringing in and under the water with her deepness, I'm now going to plug my two-part interview we did with both of them on our Rising Tide Ocean podcast. But tonight, Liz is here to talk about the benefits of MPA Hope Spots, a San Francisco Mission Blue Hope Spot, and what Point Molate and its pristine eelgrass beds could contribute to that blue hope. So thanks for being here, Liz, and take it away.
Hey, thank you so much. Really good to be here. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. We'll see how that goes. And there. All right. Hooray. So, as David said, I'm the president and CEO of DOER Marine and co-founded by Sylvia Earle, and we are a family small business, women-owned small business, but we build technology for exploring the ocean of all kinds, mostly dealing with deep water systems like this 6,500 meter remotely operated vehicle that we built for the University of Hawaii, which kind of plies the greater Pacific and on out into the deep CCZ, looking at the manganese nodules that are being targeted by deep sea miners and trying to get some information about those ahead of the destructive practices that are planned for that area, trying to build a case against it. And of course, as David said, the human occupied vehicles. And we're currently building a pair of these that will be based over primarily in French Polynesia, but again, looking at the greater Pacific and serving a dual role in terms of taking ordinary people directly into the ocean, as well as scientists and, all kinds of people that are just interested in seeing what's below scuba diving depth. But we're also very interested in carrying out Sylvia's TED wish, which was to, explore more, build the submersibles, but mostly to explore these areas that were really in good shape, or in areas that people cared about and they knew that they could kind of restore, and but they just cared about protecting them. And that kind of gave rise to the Mission Blue organization and the series of Hope Spots. So Hope Spot, as I said, is anywhere where a person can nominate a space that they care about. They have to find a scientist who's also interested in supporting that case. And then they fill out an application and they present their reasoning behind it. And it gets actually fully vetted by the IUCN. And then hopefully it is just like San Francisco Bay was approved as a Hope Spot. And the San Francisco Bay Hope Spot was one that was pretty interesting because it was one of the areas that was really deemed to be in quite poor condition if one considers the number of invasive species that we're dealing with, the amount of ship traffic that comes through, fishing pressures, all these kind of things that were really hammering the area, just the shrinkage of the bay from overdevelopment over the years, and the continued pressures to develop, right up on the coast, and just managing water and wastewater and all these issues and concerns. But there are some areas like Point Molate that are still just in great condition, very pristine, beautiful eelgrass beds, sequestering carbon and supporting all those little critters that are out there. And it just, it's really a true cause for hope having that space. And the struggle that it's been through, again, all those pressures on it to develop it and turn it into something it shouldn't be. And it's a really applaud all the work and effort that's gone into trying to protect it in an enduring way. It's really protecting our collective future. When we first did the San Francisco Bay Hope Spot, I was kind of approached by Sylvia Gibson, the blonde lady there, and she's a teacher in Alameda, and she really kind of jumped at the opportunity to work on the application, and I helped her with it. And then we recruited Karina Nielsen, who was the former director of the Romberg Center over in Tiburon. And between these two, they did all the heavy lifting, identified all the species that needed protection and were kind of unique to San Francisco Bay and all the threats to it, and actually got it approved. And these guys, the eelgrass, right at the heart of the whole matter. It's just such an important species. And here's the Romberg Center, the Estuary Research Center over there in Tiburon. And some of the work that we've been kind of helping to support them is, bringing back oysters to the bay as well. They're talking about the Ohlone Indians and their, it's really was a primary food source for them before we started seeing all the impacts of hydromining and siltation and dredging and so forth, just smothering the historic oyster beds that were throughout the bay. And so, these guys plus the eelgrass just makes such a rich environment for bringing up small fish of commercial importance, of supporting all the little small invertebrates and all the critters that like to eat them, the huge populations of seabirds that we have coming through the area from the flyways. And so it's just this robust system that has such potential for real restoration. And unfortunately now we have to do a little bit of heavy lifting where we need to bring in and create some habitat in areas that are so silted in at this point that they don't have the oysters don't have any place to settle down. And so we build these things, these oyster balls or oyster structures or oyster Legos of various kinds to give them an opportunity to settle down. And when they do, especially these ones that have sort of intricacies through them, it also allows other animals to utilize the habitat to get escape from predators and so forth. So you get, sculpins and blennies and monkey face blennies and so forth that populate these, octopus, and just all kinds of interesting creatures that hopefully will incite curiosity in the humans to come out and kind of spend more time directly in the water. And I really hope someday that we'll have restored water quality so that we'll have a clearer bay, and we'll be able to go out and enjoy more, paddling and snorkeling and things like that, just right there along our shoreline. And another reason for protection is just the tremendous amount of destruction and erosion that we've seen over the years. The eelgrass beds, oysters working together, such as we see as being fairly intact at Point Molate, it can be used as this sort of example and guidepost to help restoring other areas of the bay that have been terribly degraded by as I say, dredging, channels, all these things that are contributing to this continued degradation of the shoreline. And of course, we just have to pause to enjoy the critters that live in these areas. Got the little pipefish, the nudibranchs, crabs, all kinds of really interesting and unique animals that are associated with these areas. And if you look back and think about what compels people today to protect MPAs and what does marine protection actually mean anyway, I always like to look back to how things started on the land, and where we really started to see tremendous loss of bird life, and particularly ducks that were being taken by commercial duck hunters. The skies used to just be completely obliterated with enormous flocks of ducks, and they had these giant cannons that just blast them out of the air, and sell them as a commercial commodity, just like we do with a lot of fish species today. And it actually turned out to be some of the smaller duck hunters that started to realize that we have to protect the areas where the ducks rest, where they nest, where they raise their young, if we ever hope to be able to enjoy a duck dinner. And we've started to see a little bit of relationship happen with the smaller fishing community, where they really want to be able to have an enduring future, and they want to be able to eat a fish that is not going to be bad for them or unhealthy for them. And so they've seen and advocated in some areas for marine protected areas, so that fish do have a place to reside and to reproduce and rest and grow big, so they can be enjoyed, supporting a whole host of other species along the way. But one of the things that has happened is that we see these areas. This is this really nice shot of Point Molate right here. You can see the red rock in the distance, and just look at that robust amount of eelgrass that's there. And if we don't sort of protect these areas that are in good shape and being able to support this robust diversity of life, then we don't really have the opportunity to utilize it, to transport it to other areas. So where we have a marine protected area that's also open to fishing, it becomes a little bit dicey sometimes. So we see a lot of that in the bay, and even out at the Farallones, Gulf of the Farallones and Cordell Banks. There's still, even though they're marine protected areas, there's quite an amount of fishing that goes on in them. When Sylvia was at an event in Washington, D.C., and had an opportunity to sit at a dinner with then President George Bush, she was talking to him about marine protected areas, and he was stunned to find out that there was actually really robust fishing in many of the marine protected areas, and even in the sanctuaries. So it's a tough road sometimes to create a truly protected area where the animals can relax and prosper. And we've seen in some areas that are fully protected no-take zones how quickly populations will come back. There's a Cabo Plumo in Mexico is one where we have, seen incredible fishing pressure over the years, and to the point where, the whole town was just basically fading away because they were just literally eating themselves out of house and home. And some of the elders in the community said, we need to protect the animals. We need to give the fish a chance to come back. And they voluntarily made a complete protected area, no take. And really within within a decade or so, the fish came back in such abundance that the local community was able to take fish for them, to feed their families outside of the protected area. And they have now developed a really thriving diving and tourism economy there. And they're still able to take some fish to feed their families, but they've taken away the pressure of that commercial fishing. And it's just been a really great story of success. So we can see, the value of protecting areas, of, all the natural services that are brought back, the coastal protection, the biodiversity protection, climate control, carbon sequestering. It all just kind of lashes back up in a very logical, sensible way. But the pressures to exploit are enormous. And even as, when you show people how much good is coming from protecting an area, there are still, just as I say, tremendous pressures to exploit or to ease up on the protection. In fact, right now we're seeing it happen at a marine monument in Hawaii. So the big Northwest Hawaiian Island Monument is a complete no-take zone. I think it's the biggest, one of the biggest protected areas globally. And it's still being assaulted today by groups trying to open it up to tuna fishing again. So it's just stunning that, you can see these kind of layers of protection that come into place, and they're really showing great evidence of success. You start to see an uptick in biodiversity. Species that have been missing for a long time start to come back and reinvigorate the area. And then all of a sudden you still just have to keep fighting to keep them protected. So it's just like this never ending cycle, it seems. Let's see if we can get to the next slide. So, what does Point Molate have to bring besides eelgrass and so forth? I mean, it's got this great potential. People are crazy for birds, I have to say. I studied marine ornithology for a while when I was at UC Davis myself, and before I went to Cal. And I actually picked up one of these guys right out of a roadway. Coming home from school one day, was walking up the middle of the road and almost got hit by a car. And I snatched it up in a towel I had in the car and brought it home, put it in the bathtub, and took it out to the Lindsay Museum Wildlife Center. And it was, rehabilitated and released. But it's just, you see these birds like this and realize how dependent they are on the fish, on the crustaceans and so forth that are supported in an area like Point Molate. And they're really reliant on having a complete ecosystem. And a lot of people don't like these birds. They think, oh, the birds are taking my fish. But they need to eat the fish, and we don't necessarily. And then there's the little guys that inhabit the eelgrass. And we opened a kind of a public facing Explore store as part of our business. And we did it right in the height of the pandemic, and it was kind of a really crazy thing to do. But people were curious. They were trying to find things they could do locally to get outside. And the number of people that came through and were curious and asked me, is it okay if I snorkel in the bay? And people would come in and they had just maybe seen a bat ray go by, or a leopard shark, and they're compelled. They want to put on the mask and snorkel and dive in with them. And so when you start to see these little guys coming back, just right here in the bay, you're like, how many people have gone out there and donned the mask and found one of these little guys? But they're out there. And these is Year of the Rabbit, but it's actually Year of the Sea Hare. So we've got these little guys out there. We've got the much larger sea hares that are starting to come through the bay soon as well. So just a robust source of interest and curiosity, and get kids out there and start seeing these animals. And it's just a incredible resource that we have. And the jellies, of course, drifting around the outer banks, outer edges of the bay. Sometimes we'll just see tons of these guys and going on and down into Monterey. And in deeper water, of course, the anemones. But they all tie together. You think about the bay and the ocean beyond as a very vertical space. Most people, when they're out on the bay, whether they're sailing or paddling or just crossing the ferry, they don't really think about the verticality of the environment that's there. And it's such an interesting thing to think about, because we have things right up on the shore. You might see the barnacles and the mussels and things like that, but every drop of water out there has something living in it. And sometimes we just have to think about the really small things that are out there. But it's all interconnected. And of course, these little guys, the little anchovies, they, if you think about some of the small fish that come through the bay and that really are, again, tied back directly to the health of these robust eelgrass meadows. These little guys, the anchovies, they filter feed, they open their mouths like this. They're like a little miniature whale. they just kind of go along and they scoop everything up, kind of sift it out and then swallow it. But, you think about what's going into our bay. We have a lot of plastics, we have a lot of things that aren't so good for these guys. And then we have people that are actually going out and they want to catch these and eat them themselves. And so what we do to the environment, what we do to their food source, we're really doing to ourselves. So it really does behoove us to think about greater protection for the bay and how we can restore it, how we can protect it starting up on the land, as we have we've seen in these local big storm events, just how much plastic and how much debris was washed up on shore. It was just stunning, especially after a drought situation where we just had this huge pulse of storm water come into the bay, and the amount of logs and debris and things from the fire zones, it all just washed down. And it's been quite interesting to think about how are we going to monitor that pulse over time, what occurred right then. And then of course with the king tides and all these other impacts that we had coming in, it was quite a interesting phenomenon to see that huge amount of debris coming into the bay, and looking at the impacts. I witnessed it around Alameda, where our company is, and went out and documented some of the debris that washed up. I haven't seen what's happened at Point Molate or some of the before and after photographs, but I'm sure they're equally compelling, just thinking about the amount of runoff that the area was subjected to, and that big pulse of fresh water and debris from the land. These guys are kind of one of our, I don't know, I think I've always find them to be quite the success story of restoration. And, I think about how close we came to really losing these birds in the age of DDT toxicity, and with their thinning eggshells and so forth. And then to see them coming back in such great numbers has been really a wonderful thing to see. And it's another, really photogenic and cool bird that people love to watch flying about, that are again reliant right back to those sorts of environments that we have at Point Molate. These guys, you watch them come through and just dive down into the bay, and they're after those fish that have grown up in the eelgrass beds that are coming through to feed on the on the anchovies and herring and so forth. So it's quite a nice thing to see these birds when they're nice and robust and healthy, and know that through protecting an area that we're actually helping to protect these larger animals like this. So it's really coming through as a community here in the bay, and being able to help each other and to help the bigger community in terms of thinking about what we can do every day in our collective way to help champion the San Francisco Bay Hope Spot and look at the areas within the Hope Spot, Point Molate, Point Richmond, Alameda, all the different micro areas around the bay. And I'd like to really think of it as sort of being, pearls in a oyster necklace all around the bay, and how we can, join them together. I've always had this idea that if we could get enough people together and kids together, that we can almost make sort of this little travel passport of places to visit around the bay to really help people understand that when we protect one area, we have that capacity to carry it forward and protect other areas, and kind of take lessons learned from one space and move them to another. And soon enough, you do have this network of caring and compassion and being able to really witness positive change. I think so many of us have been witnesses to just a decimation of plants and animals in our lifetime, 40-50% of biodiversity gone in just the last 40 years. And it's shocking to go to an area, at least for me, to go back to an area where I grew up as a kid. And you just see all the holes in the fabric of life that are there now. So, where are the frogs? Where are the newts? Where are the, many of the birds, many of the plants, in fact. And so in some cases we still have a chance. But it really does take dedicated effort and that knowledge that we now have about the mistakes made in the past. How can we learn from the past and improve the future so that we do have an enduring space, and we learn to respect the biodiversity. And we really need it. We need these systems to be intact in order to really support an enduring place for humans. So it can start on the land, but it's all connected. It's all the water cycle coming back to us, and where we do protect the ocean, and even small areas, and afford it full protection, it can really be a force multiplier for a much bigger region. So it's really gratifying to to see how much support and that has happened there to really help protect this area that's so special. Point Molate has always had a special place to me. I love to come out and do the bird watching and see the small animals down in the eelgrass and think about the just how that little space can then be used as a launching point to really broaden the reach and restore areas that have been completely decimated all around the bay, and then take it on out into deeper water, into other areas up and down the coast. The eelgrass doesn't just exist in the San Francisco Bay. It's a plant that has importance all up and down our coast, and other species of it out into other areas in the Gulf of Mexico, and on up to other regions around the country. The seagrasses, the eelgrasses are vitally important. So where we can lead by example here, we can establish a blueprint that can be extremely useful to others who are sort of waking up to the fact that they need to protect areas, and that we can be impactful with the lessons we learn here, and exporting those into other new areas, maybe perhaps even new hope spots, but learning how we can increase that protection and broaden the reach. So every one of us can make a difference and help out with this. And I really do applaud everything that everyone is doing to lead the way. I think we've just got such an opportunity to take this very degraded or imperiled bay that we all live around, and to turn it into a real story of hope. So it's I just love that opportunity to share that with everyone, and to figure out ways and means that we can leverage it further. It's a personal goal of mine to really help launch the next sort of group of scientists with the, with the role I have at the Women Divers Hall of Fame. There's a lot of scholarship opportunities for students, especially if you're not just girls, but girls and boys, to get out there and, learn to dive, learn to how to do scientific sampling, and learn all those skills that can help us to be more effective advocates and scientists in the ocean. So I'd love to, going to cut it a little bit short today because I just really want to open it up and get a conversation going about how we can help, how we can be more impactful, and would love to take some questions.
Yeah, no kidding, dude. Yeah, so go. Okay, I'm gonna text them about
David?
I just ask people to start asking questions. I think
Let's do it. Let's have a conversation about how we can, what do we think about marine protected areas, and how can we make Point Molate the rising star?
I have to share with you something scary from last week's presentation, which is our river otters that we documented taking out a leopard shark off Point Molate.
I saw that.
Apparently they also grab pelicans from below and drown them in order to feed on them. So,
well, it brings me back to a really interesting thing that I was talking to Kathy Boyer, the acting director there at the Romberg Center, and this discussion about bringing sea otters back into the bay and what impact that might have. Because right now with the kelp degradation, even though they used to be in the bay, years ago, kelp degradation has kind of made it hard for them to traverse in any kind of safety the coast, because they're easy pickings for predators coming up the coast. So there's this big debate about, do we bring back the sea otter to the bay? So what do you guys think? Should we do it?
I'm going to turn it over to Sally for a second. Sally, we're going to post questions we can post questions in the chat. You're also welcome to raise your electronic hand and ask questions and open up a discussion. And Sally will be monitoring that. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that wonderful talk. So I'm going to be looking at the chat, but people are also welcome to use the raised hand function, which is usually under reactions. I don't see anybody on a phone, so I won't deal with that.
That's good.
But then I'll call on speakers and I'll check the chat for additional questions. And if you're raising your hand and you are recognized to speak, you will receive a pop-up on your screen. Danny will send it to you that will allow you to unmute yourself. Okay, so the first question is already in the chat, which is there or was there a herring run this year, and how are the herring doing?
Herring. Yeah, I've been seeing some news about some of the fish have been coming in, but I haven't seen anything that would indicate like the full run has come in yet. Do you know, David?
There are some initial herring sightings and excited birds and seals, but I don't think it's hit the full run yet.
Yeah, it was my thought as well.
Okay, and Tarnal Abbott has her hand up.
Hi, thank you. A few years ago, there was a point where I was finding really good sized oyster shells on the Point Molate beach. And in the last, I don't know, a couple of years since then, I haven't seen them anymore. And I don't know, I see little ones, but not these really big, like, 4-inch, 5-inch shells. And I think that there was a pilot project having them out there, but I don't know what happened. I don't know why we don't see those big shells anymore. Do you know?
So our native oyster is actually really tiny, and they might, if they're a really big one, they might get up to like 50-cent size, specimen. So the shells you were probably seeing, or they may have been the introduced oyster that we see commonly in the oyster, in oyster farming, or what some of the people who are trying to restore oysters are doing is they're collecting the oyster shell from restaurants that are, again, using the big oysters that are originating in Japan or other areas. They collect the shell, they age the shell out on a rooftop or a yard someplace to let it be hit by the sun and kind of be sterilized and get a little bit pitted. And then they introduce the native oyster spat onto that shell and then, put it back into the bay. And in some cases, that direct just placing of the shell, it's not that effective, or they found it wasn't that effective because it was just getting degraded by moving around and predation and so forth. So now they put them into either bags or structures of some sort, so that the native oysters have a better chance of getting established. So I think when you see a native oyster shell, they're actually they're maybe this big. They're pretty small guys.
Yep. There's a lot of them on the beach.
Yeah, and they're great. I love seeing them starting to come back, and but they're they used to be a huge commercial take of those guys. Back when Jack London was living in Alameda and Oakland, he was actually kind of an oyster poacher. He would go out and gather up those small but tasty Olympia oysters, and he'd sell them, on Webster Street in Alameda. But again, the gold mining up in the Sierras just released these huge clouds of siltation that smothered most of those native oyster beds. So we've got kind of a uphill battle to bring those guys back in any kind of really meaningful numbers, but they're going to be great to improve our water quality.
So let me just ask a quick follow-up. Are the larger oysters, are they an invasive species? Do we need to worry about them establishing a foothold in the bay, or do the native oysters have an advantage?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, technically they are kind of invasive because they're not native to the area. But if we had maybe those river otters will help us out and eat some of those guys. People will. But you have to think about, here's the conundrum is, oysters, people love to eat them, but you have to think about, well, what does an oyster do? It sits there and it filters all the sponge out of the water in addition to what it eats. So, if you want to enjoy oysters, you really have to care about improving the water quality wherever they may occur. Because, you are what you eat, right?
Okay, so there are a couple of comments about sea otters in the bay, and people very much in favor of sea otters in the bay. But Jeannie Quartz asks, would they pose any kind of a threat to San Francisco Bay sea life and wildlife?
Well, they are, native to the region. They haven't been in the bay for a long time, so it would be kind of something you'd have to really watch closely. I think what's been talked about is maybe bringing, a couple of pair, slowly monitor the situation, see how they do with other predators that might come after them, and just, kind of just see what transpires. But they are native to the area. It's just a matter of kind of reintroducing them to see how they would fare. But I don't think there's anything that they would, be particularly damaging to. And they might even improve the situation.
Thank you. Okay. So Jim Hansen asks, he thanks you. The concrete shapes that you showed on the piers earlier, were they mostly for oysters or for other crustacean and fish species too? And do you know more or less where in the bay they have been placed?
So those oyster balls and spheres and Legos, if you will, they've been placed in some interesting spots. There's some in the newly kind of restored Quartermaster Reef over in the Presidio, or adjacent to the Presidio. there actually were some put on flats out in Richmond, not at Point Molate, but other places in Richmond. And they are kind of designed to have some dual functionality. So they definitely will support the oyster spat and the grow out of the oyster. But the concrete itself takes some of those non-native oyster shells and kind of crushes it up into the concrete mixture. So it's a little bit more inviting, and it's not leaching out, concrete into the environment. It's sort of a bioconcrete. So they've also placed them, we're trying to get some placed over in Alameda, working on that right now. So those are the primary places. I think they may have had some over near Sausalito as well, just as, small test areas to see how they do. And Kathy Boyer over at the Romberg Center she's really been kind of working on that program along with another nonprofit called the Wild Oyster Project, which is mostly collecting the shell and processing it so that it can be used in these structures. So it's going to be really interesting to see how those do and what other kinds of animals can be supported with those, because it does provide a lot of space for, for small fish, for other invertebrates, those little cute nudibranchs, things like that will make use of that shelter as well.
And a number of them are off Point Pinole and here.
That's right. Thank you. Yeah,
And-
Point Pinole.
And potentially could certainly be off Point Molate if we ever get to the Point Molate Park, which is the campaign we've just launched, Point Molate Park Now.
Yeah, and that would just be so awesome to see that happen.
So Liz, Jen Mahoney asks, where has 40 to 50% of biodiversity been lost in San Francisco Bay, and over how long a period?
Well, it's really that's a kind of a global number. So if you look, the IUCN, International Union for the Conservation of Nature, has really kind of documented that steep decline globally. So I think, any of us just have been in the Bay Area for a long time. There's certainly, if you think about it, you think about just the birds and other wildlife that has kind of gone missing. I mean, I can't tell you the last time that I encountered a spadefoot toad in my yard. It's probably really been about 20 years, and they used to just show up, and now I'm kind of wondering, where are they? What's happened to them? The same, even the little, peepers and other small animals that are just kind of missing in action at the moment. They may still be out there, but just the quantities of them have just steeply declined just in our lifetime, at least in my lifetime. So and I go back to our hometown in Florida, where I used to commonly encounter, these great big rhinoceros beetles that walk around in my hand, and walking sticks, and just a huge diversity of insects and other creatures, amphibians, reptiles, and they're just gone. I actively hunt for them. I had a couple of biologists from the Academy of Sciences come investigate our yard looking for the lowly potato bug or Jerusalem cricket. I think everybody encounters those out on their yards. And the biologist was telling me there used to be 5 or 6 species of these guys in the Bay Area, and now they're lucky to find one. So it's a problem that we just have these shifting baselines that we just don't really think about it, or we've forgotten about some of these animals. So everything that we do to kind of help restore yard by yard, garden by garden on the land, it can help to restore some of this lost biodiversity, and will actually downstream be helping areas like Point Molate. We were kind of building rain gardens, water barrels, all those kinds of things we do in our yard, swales, and it will help to slow that progression of the stormwater and the introduction of, plastics and wastes into the bay.
An example that works in my age class is when we were young and we'd go drive in the country and the windshield would just get splattered with insects. You'd have to use the window wipers to get them off. And now you don't experience that because of the decline of insects, which are prey for birds, and, the cascading effects.
Yeah, Yeah, indeed.
But I'm wondering if you have an impression. So we had this big red tide in the bay,
Oh,
followed
heard of that.
followed by our atmospheric river, which created a lot of sedimentation and runoff into the bay. And what's your sense of recovery time? I mean, the bay has been healing. Do you think how much of a setback is your sense on these 1-2 blows?
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of the red tide, brown tide, was linked back to our really decrepit wastewater system. You think about all the development that's happened just in our lifetimes around the bay, and every new big block of housing that goes up, it's an area with maybe there was a warehouse there, or maybe there was a single family home there, and there might have been like 3 toilets in the place, and now all of a sudden there's 700 plus the showers plus the kitchen plus the laundry, and you think about the plus of the impact of our numbers just on the environment and the amount of water, and where does the water go? And we have that one that one plant over there by the Bay Bridge that is responsible for treating the wastewater for literally hundreds of thousands of households. And it really, I mean, they do a remarkable job with the resources they have to treat it, but still a lot of the water is released in a partially treated way, or it still has it could be filtered at a lot higher levels, but it costs a lot more money to do that. So that big nutrient load going into the bay, combined with kind of poor circulation, just was setting the buffet for all those little red brown algae out there to burst forth. And I mean, I couldn't believe it when I walked along the shore and it was like root beer, like a really bad flat root beer, just sort of bowling along, and all the dead fish. It was heartbreaking. So now we see the big atmospheric river pulse, and certainly it flushed a lot of water through and out the Golden Gate, but at the same time it brought a tremendous amount of silt, and especially from the burned areas, it did logs and debris and all manner of stuff came down into the bay, and you could see again the big shift in color. And I mean, nature has an enormous capacity to heal when we either leave it alone or take steps to care for it better. But it was kind of shocking to see the extent of the red tide, and then this big pulse of water. But we know that we can expect more situations like that, so it's really behooves us to get about thinking about how we can revamp the way we treat water and wastewater, and how we can really slow down the flows of storm water to give the land more time to reabsorb it, filter it, and so forth before it reaches the bay. So any area we have an opportunity to like de-pave it, or to put in pavers instead of concrete, these small things that people can do yard by yard, it's a huge help. So I'm hoping we'll see a pretty quick turnaround in our water quality.
Thank you, Liz. And so we have a question and an answer in the chat, but maybe you can expand on it. Jen Mahoney asks, who placed the oyster balls at Point Molate? And Danny Zaki answers, I know the watershed project has some in Molate. And so do you know more about the placement of the oyster balls, and particularly in Molate?
David, do you have any more on that? Who I know it was
An oyster project worked with the parks folks, and I think there were a few other partners in that one.
It was kind of a collaboration, as I recall.
Yeah,
So it's like a one point organization, but the idea was to get kind of some community engagement around it.
and getting the native oysters, as you say, back in. There's
Right.
the bay is recovering in parts, but it's also fully invaded. It's one of the most invasive rich, which I think nobody would mind if the otters came back in and ate a lot of green Asian crabs. And
Right.
I mean, it's so invaded that 20 years ago, the indicator species for the health of the bay was the striped bass until somebody
Great.
pointed out that this was also an invasive species.
Invasive species. Oh, man, never ends, right?
Okay, so Jen also asks whether you do presentations to 3rd and 4th graders in the public schools when ecology-related topics go into the curriculum, or with Oakland Museum's educational modules on local habitat, or do other nonprofits do this?
Well, I always leap at an opportunity like that if they come about. We do have I carry out a lot of field trips and so forth at our shop in Alameda. Mostly it turns out to be kids that are interested in learning how to make things, or they're kind of STEM and STEAM kids. And sometimes they get plein air artists that come through and others, but I always love having that engagement. And through our Deep Ocean Explorer store, I've started to expand our, kind of our educational offerings as well. We've been working with the artist Wyland on his,
Oh, cool.
he's got a water challenge going on for mayors in various cities, trying to get them to adopt rivers and streams and how they connect back to the ocean. So yeah, if I ever have an opportunity, I love to engage with kids and just like see them get wet and dirty and muddy out there. It's the best. Put a hand lens on them, give them some binoculars, and just see where it leads, and hopefully maintain the curiosity that we're all born with, but that somehow is kind of beaten out of us as we get older by our life experiences and sometimes those around us. So we have to keep curiosity alive.
Thank you. And Jim Hansen asks, in addition to Bay Area residents, there are various agencies such as the Regional Water Board and others who have responsibility for knowing what's happening and regulating sediment and other runoff into the bay. Do you know if there's a dashboard of sorts by any agency or institution that enables one to track how the bay health is doing over time?
David, do you have a?
Yeah, there's, I'm trying to remember the proper name, but it's like one of the estuarine institutes, Bay Area estuarine institutes that Werner Chabot works at.
Right.
That's a
Okay.
regular state of the bay health.
And I think the Romberg Center is also trying to, do more in that sector as well, to just kind of get a handle on the overall monitoring. We're hoping to, before too much longer, have more autonomous systems available, so we can go out and do, kind of more regular transect work around the bay. It's a great area to, test equipment. So
It's a good one. Somebody's asking, would you swim in the bay?
People ask me this all the time, right? Is it safe to swim in the bay? Because they do. They want to get out there, and it's crazy that we've got this amazing resource, and yet we're kind of like nervous to swim in the bay because there might be sewage, there might be things that would bite us, there might be all the what ifs. But I see an increasing number of people that are getting out in the bay, and again, we've got a group of stalwart women that come into our dive shop. They call themselves the Bat Rays, and they swim almost every day off of Crown Beach in Alameda. Got a few other ones that swim regularly in the bay, and they love it, and they're excited. They come back and say, "Oh, I saw a giant lemon peel nudibranch on the rock wall," and they're just like, they're really thrilled when they have more than 3 inches of visibility, and they're able to see some interesting critters out there. So I think overall it's reasonably safe, and I think the more oysters we get back in the bay, the better it's going to be.
And it's kind of like, do you like cold water a lot?
Oh yeah, I mean there certainly is the thermal issue, but just a nice wetsuit will do a lot for that.
And the old surfer principle, which seems to work in terms of runoff and all, is just stay out of the water 72 hours after big rainstorm.
Right.
And
Exactly.
the bay is getting more swimmers, and certainly has lots of kiteboarders and kayakers and lots of people close to the water, lots of people in the water. And, you know, it's number one in our 50 ways to save the ocean. Go to the beach because you protect what you love.
Yeah, and I mean, what a goal to have, a swimmable bay, right? So if we want to bring otters back to the bay, if we want to see like a humpback whale come in once in a while, the dolphins and so forth, we have to think about them too. We want them to be swimmable for them as well. And you know, so the more we can do upstream and to improve water quality in the bay, the better it is, more swimmable for us and better for the wildlife we care about.
Okay, and I think we have time for one last question from Jim Hansen. What's a wonderful place to visit in a submersible?
Well, almost any place where you have, you know, good visibility and it's really deeper than a diver can go. So when we did the sustainable seas expeditions, we visited all the U.S. marine sanctuaries, and we were using these little one-person submersibles at that time. So it meant that we had to train over 100 different scientists and educators and astronauts and people of all kinds to directly operate these little vehicles. And they just loved it. And one of the most compelling episodes happened when we were, I think we were in the Gulf of Mexico off I think we were near the Flower Garden banks, and somebody was down in the submersible, and they were down, 500-600 feet, something like this. And a swordfish out of nowhere, out of the blue, just came screaming past at high speed. And then it put all of its fins out, turned around, it came back. And it just started like swirling around the submersible, and it was looking in with its big softball sized eye and flashing all these bars of color and, purple and aquamarine and ultramarine and just swirling and silver and beautiful. And then it was gone. And the guy came back and landed on the deck of the ship, and he got out and he says, "I will never be able to eat swordfish again. I've seen this animal. I feel like I was eating a tiger. I'm done," and that's the beauty of taking people down in a submersible, is they will come back fundamentally changed. And it's the beauty of being able to protect these places that we love. I love the thought of being able to take a group of kids out and get them all fitted in a goggles or face mask and let them plink around on those eelgrass beds and be excited by a nudibranch or pipefish or some cool animal that they're going to see. And just watch them be changed forever in a good way.
Thank you very much. Back to you, Pam.
Thank you very much. As David said, we're launching the Point Molate Park Now campaign, and we'll be posting clips and quotes from our various presentations. And one quote, I think you've given us another great slogan: protecting Point Molate is protecting our collective future. So thank you. We'll be using that in our campaign. And yeah, this has been tremendous. Thank you so much, Liz. And I'm going to turn it over to David.
I'd just say thank you again. And, we're looking for hope spots, and Point Molate is certainly one of them. When you talked about overdevelopment along the Bayshore, we have a city council that voted not to spend $300 million to put thousands of new houses where we have a natural living seashore. And this is, the beginning of hopefully a changed attitude that will spread with knowledgeable people like yourself.
Well, thank you. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to engage with everyone, and you're all welcome to come over to Alameda and ask me more questions.
And check out her shop. Great dive shop there.
Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, Annie.